Welcome to Disengaged, the podcast. I'm Leah Harding, your host. From growing up in the mission field in Kenya to going into the CIA and then becoming an author of The Missionary Kids, a book about unmasking the myth of white evangelicalism. Our guest this week is Berkley Fletcher. She's incredible. She's honestly really, really fun to talk to. And I'm so glad you get to listen to our chat about unmasking the white evangelical movement. What does that even mean? Where do you even start talking about this? Well, Holly, welcome to Disengaged. It's so good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
And you are really all over the map, from MK, former CIA, academia, and you're fascinating. I was reading your book and I was like, I need to talk to this woman. What a fascinating person.
Yeah, I'm kind of, and I just keep getting more dilettantish in my interests. So I keep adding. I really need to. If I could pick a lane, maybe I could really be like a Taylor Swift type talent, but I just can't. So.
I think that's all of our greatest regrets, is that we didn't harness the moody teenage angst and really specialize in it. I feel that too.
Yeah. Anyway.
So going back to the beginning for you in your book, and also just as a missionary kid, there's this concept of living in a bubble. And how do you explain exactly what that means to someone who did not have that experience?
Well, I think we all live in bubbles to an extent. I think, that concept's been talked about a lot, actually, with regards to U.S. politics, how we're increasingly in our left or right bubbles, and increasingly getting all of our information, within those bubbles. So I think we're familiar with the bubble these days. Here in America, what's unique about the MK bubble is it is extreme. Like, you are living very much differently in most cases. Some MKs, it's different. They live more on the level of the community. But most MKs I've found, and including myself, you're living really economically very high above the other people in the country where you live. You're often mainly around other missionaries or maybe expats. In my case, I went to a boarding school that was literally it's like surrounded nowadays by this huge fence, and it's a world unto itself. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and contained by this sort of fence. And so you're living in a country that the real reality of which your interaction is fairly limited. And at a time when you're forming your identity. And so I think that's the key thing, is the bubble is really is really a huge feature in missionary kids' identity formation. And therefore, when they move back to their passport country, as we call it, they've formed their identity in such a specific context. It's not easily transferable, and it's not easily relatable. There's not a lot of touch points either when you meet, like, say I meet Kenyans, there's not that many. Now there's more, because I've tried to get to know the country as an adult more so than I did as a child. But, generally, not a lot of touch points. And then and with Americans too, they don't understand your upbringing. So it's a challenge. It's a particular challenge for MKs, but I don't think it's completely unique to them.
And the world, as you mentioned so many times in your book, Unmasking the Myth of White Evangelicalism, is that this world that you grew up in many ways, it doesn't exist. Like, you can't go back to it. And it's this shell, hollow thing. It lives in your mind. You spend so much time chasing it. And how have you struggled with that, especially when you were coming out of the bubble initially? When you were how old? Where did you leave?
I graduated high school. It was really hard for me, and I think it was very hard for many people that I talked to. I would say there's a lot of variety in MK experience, but the one that seemed to really go through everyone's experience is grief, enormous grief of some MKs experience grief along the way because maybe there's a lot of coming and going from the mission field, where your best friends, parents decide that, they don't raise enough support if they're that type of missionary. And so they have to leave and you lose there's a lot of that. Or there might be a political crisis in the country and you guys, your parents and your family, you have to like leave suddenly. And yeah, I spent years in grief. I didn't know to sort of name it that. And I didn't deal with it as such. And so therefore I dealt with it really badly. And I really had very little interest in even trying to relate to other Americans my age or making friends or anything like that. I just really shut myself off. I got married very early at 19 to another missionary kid, and it was a disaster.
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
That was, they tell you, I mean, if you go through therapy for grief, they tell you you don't want to make a major life choice in the midst of grief because you're not in your right mind, of course. And so no, for me, that was just like kind of a lifeline. Like it was a way, to sort of nail something down and to feel like, make a little life raft for myself, but it just obviously made things worse. There's few things worse than being in a miserable marriage, especially as an
when
evangelical.
You're like 19.
Yeah, especially when you're an evangelical and there's not an easy way out. So,
well, that's so with self-advocacy, there's so many interwoven themes of that in your book, especially around abuse or a lack of like education when it comes to sex or relationships when you leave the bubble. And when you like suddenly you're in the United States and you're in college and you're supposed to just continue on somehow in this like purity culture mindset where in many ways where like your body isn't yours. It's like a collective thing. Like you're a part of a group. You're not just Holly or Leah in a way. What kind of a belief did you have about self-advocacy coming out of the white evangelical Kenya missionary kid bubble?
Yeah, I mean, zero. I mean, I don't know if I've been sort of out of hardcore evangelicalism for a little while, not too long, but like going on 10 years now. So I don't know if it's gotten better. But certainly when I was in it, and again, my many missionary parents, including mine, very hardcore evangelical. No, you don't just like casually become a missionary. It's usually some pretty hardcore people. So they were certainly like that. In the school I went to, certainly like that. And I just find in evangelical culture where there's such a conformist instinct, there's such a need for everybody's sort of buy-in to a very certain set of beliefs and practices. I think one of my least favorite little evangelical sayings, there's so many of them, but one of my least favorite ones that I've heard ad nauseum and when I was unhappily married and trying to figure out, what to do and how to fix it was, God wants you to be holy, not happy. I hate that saying with a passion because I don't think it's true at all in any of my experience of what God is or might be, but also it's incredibly gaslighting. Like,
yeah, demeaning.
Oh, you're miserable? Oh, well, God, that's fine because God just wants you to be holy. Mm-hmm. And I've heard actually people talk about abuse and sort of, when bad things happen to people in this way of like, well, God's going to use this to make you, like, I'm like, God may use this in your life to make you a better person or a stronger person or a person that can help others. But I don't think abuse is ever, okay,
No. But so often it is used as, you say something along the lines of the worse the trauma someone experienced, the greater the healing. So like people who are the abusers are almost, if they say, well, I've repented, God has now made me holy again, I'm clean, like then that is seen as such a positive thing when like that's not how addiction or abuse works. That's not how healing comes about.
No, it's rarely instant. It's a constant. I mean, anybody who's like an AA or like will tell you like, it's not one and done. Like, you have to keep going to those meetings for life, really. And you have to keep, and you fall off the wagon and then you get back on, like, it's not. And when you're talking about someone who has who has abused people, like, that's not, you can't risk the lives of others by hoping that they've gotten themselves together, that they've rehabilitated. If
Yeah.
someone has abused children, they couldn't be redeemed in other ways. Maybe they can, hopefully maybe they can be redeemed and have another job, but they can't be around children. They can't,
Right.
you can't pastor a church. You can go do something else, but you can't go pastor a church. You can't be a missionary. You can't be in ministry if you have abused people. That's just not, I don't think that's in the cards for you.
But it's happening. And like, you're
Sure.
so,
Yeah.
and like, that's the whole point of your book. I feel like,
Well,
really
it's
is
one
kind
of
of
the
one
of
of
the
one of like
themes
probably like
is,
12 themes.
one of the myths is the myth of saints, and so
Yes.
yeah.
So why do you think that myth of saints has been able to live on, like, through from the civil rights movement through till now? Like, that it doesn't feel, as a former missionary kid myself, it doesn't feel like it's really truly been that shaken.
Well, I think a lot of these stories are still hidden. In fact, I got an email today from someone who recognized something in my book that I kept anonymous to, out of consideration for family members or whatever. But this reader recognized who it was and seemed quite upset that I would bring this up, that it would be harmful to the family and whatever. And, I'm like, what their parent did was what's harmful to them. Like, it doesn't behoove anyone to sweep it under the rug. I really do. All of the stories in the book, that some people told me their stories, obviously, and I got their permission. But the things that I included from my experience, I wrestled with, because there's a lot of pressure to, keep things looking nice, and neat from the outside. And, am I going to be the one that sort of spills the beans? I can see how that's not a good look for everybody, Maybe I'm fear, mongering and gossip or what have you, or sensationalism. But the fact is, most of this is not ever talked about, and it's not known, and most everybody talked to me anonymously because they didn't want to risk all the ties, their family ties, the community ties. So I think that's beyond the mission field, but I just think in evangelicalism writ large. But I just think it's more extreme because missionaries have been, and I include a lot of history in the book, from the beginning, missions has been this grand, heroic adventure by mainly American Christians. The early missions were British and American, but really Americans sort of perfected the modern missionary model. And now is sort of past, other evangelical cultures are imitating it now in more recent years. But really, it's a very American sort of grand adventure, manifest destiny kind of impulse. And it's rooted in a very heroic view of, unite America as the city on a hill, but then even within that of white American Christians, and having this sort of we've got this Christianity thing down, we've got it right. And then, of course, the early missionaries did take enormous risks, much more so than now. Back in the 19th century, many of them did die of disease or other things. And they literally abandoned their children once they got to be age 6. They would send them back to the United States, and they literally didn't raise their own children because it was not seen as safe. But more importantly, if you read the accounts of the time, they didn't want their kids to be corrupted by the heathen children. Like, they'll literally say that. So these children were just really abandoned. And that was seen as, worth it for the cause. So these heroic narratives go way back. And then the other thing that's part of it is, again, how Americans and white American Christians have engaged in race. Missions has been sort of a crutch for that, so that they can sort of have a better, it's still this way, in my opinion. The mission field is a much more pleasing stage on which to act out, racial enlightenment, or, some sort of, engage with race. It's a much, much more pleasing setting than the United States, where, we as white Americans are deeply, and white Christians are deeply complicit in the problems here. We
Right.
are part of the problem, versus you go over there and you're an outsider.
Hmm.
And the way people of color overseas respond to us as white Americans is much nicer and more hospitable than the way Black Americans often respond to us here, because we're all tangled up in this very ugly history.
There is a
So
very
yeah,
uncomfortable, like, superstar element of going back. Like, I've been in Ethiopia the last few weeks and, like, riding around in the back of a pickup truck, going to different well sites that my parents' organization were a part of and that continue now. And, like, people yelling for you and waving at you. And it's
yep.
like, that is, I think, part of the hook of it, is like it does make you feel good, but then at the same time it's highly uncomfortable because it is, the racial discrepancy is just so obvious.
Yeah,
Like,
it's highly uncomfortable if you're self-aware, which many white evangelicals are not at all. Like,
right.
it's almost a culture of a lack of self-awareness. You know what I'm saying? I hate to say that, because obviously there's variety and there's some lovely introspective people in that culture. But as a culture, so I read this book that I cite in my book extensively, and I've talked about it a lot in these interviews because it hasn't gotten very much attention that I found, and it's so insightful. It's by a Christian psychologist named Dave Verhagen, and it's called How White Evangelicals Think. And he argues with data that white evangelical culture is a culture of collective narcissism. And one of the things that he cites is higher than average rates of narcissistic personality disorder traits among white evangelicals. Americans writ large, by the way, are more narcissistic than most other countries in the world, which is not surprising either, right? But
No,
white evangelicals are even more narcissistic because, and it kind of makes sense actually, because narcissism is a form of escape from self and failure and all the negative things you don't want to think about.
that's
You
such a
don't want
great
to,
way of explaining it. I haven't heard
yeah.
it seen
Yeah,
or
so
described that way.
you have your fear, all religions respond to a fear of death, of course, as human beings, we're all afraid to die. You have your and you have a sense of we all have this kind of a sense of failure. We all have a fear of all have our sort of self-loathing parts of us. And our fearful, anxious parts of us. And a healthy individual can look at that and engage with that and sort of make their peace and come out the other side. But what unhealthy cultures and people do is create another sort of edifice on top of it, and they like to stay in that. And so religions of high control and high certainty are narcissistic because they create this structure of certainty that is an escape from the fear of death, and then they create this structure of grandiosity and a moral certainty to escape from moral failure. And I think that's particularly potent among with white evangelicalism, which is rooted, by the way, in what we now know as white evangelicalism nationally has its most direct theological ties to Southern Christianity.
Yeah.
And that was all basically that theology and culture evolved to offset guilt and shame over slavery. So that is how it started, and that's how it really continues as this sort of escapist vision of what we are. So there's a lot of good, people and impulses and good deeds and things in white evangelicalism. But as a system and as a culture, I don't think you can really understand it without understanding that aspect of it.
And that's something that within the bubble, I was completely unaware of until reading your book, the direct link to when and why it started, why the big boom of go out, go, especially to Africa, which was seen as like, if you went there, then you were really serious about your faith. And then the rewards back home were also bigger. The praise was bigger at home, and the racial disparity was greater on the field. So yeah, I was like, the lack of talking about that within the bubble.
No, there's not even a talking. There's no awareness. There's no awareness. Yeah.
And why do you think, why do you think that is? Is it because if you did have the self-awareness, then you couldn't be a part of it? Is it kind of a hand in hand in a way?
Again, I think there's just a lot of, I think white evangelicalism is a very carefully constructed world, and you don't want to take too many of the pieces out, right? It's like those Jenga towers, Mm-hmm. I certainly had experience just with the doctrine side of it, but it's not just the theology of it. It's a carefully constructed culture. It's a carefully constructed view of history. It's a carefully constructed view of society and and non-Christians and other cultures and other religions. And there's a lot that has gone into it to ensure that people are comfortable, and that they're the good that they're the good guys, because it's kind of a self-fulfilling thing where like you build this culture of certainty, and that you have to sustain that. The certainty is essential to what it is, and so everything has to go into sustaining the certainty. There's just a lot of things that folks don't want to deal with. And I just also find, and I think it's a very American thing. It may be true in other cultures too. I don't know. But people just don't know history like very well.
No,
as a historian,
true.
I'm regularly appalled. But evangelicals in particular don't know correct history. They have kind of, and particularly with regards to race, I don't know how you can take a strong look at American history and not come away with the idea that, racism is really deep-seated, and it's not something that's it's an entire system. It came, slavery and then racism was a politics. It was a religion. It was an economics. It was a social, it affected every walk of life. And so you don't just snap your fingers and just correct all that damage. It takes a real concerted effort. And when there's a large part of the population that doesn't want to look at it and doesn't want to keep working at it, because it's unpleasant. Let's be honest. Like it's not pleasant, and it might cost something.
And it is such an unfortunate, it's not a strong enough word, but an irony that this movement of spreading the gospel in white evangelical Southern America specifically bred out of a dislike for how the civil rights movement was going about, to then be glorified for going to a predominantly Black continent and working there to try to save people that you don't actually think should have the same rights as you back home.
The irony is thick. I mean, I was raised Southern Baptist, and boy, are they proud of their mission board, and it is the best, like they pay their missionaries and they take care of their people, and they've got all the metric. I mean, it's basically like a corporation. It's run like a corporation. It has a large budget. It has assets. It has, they do strategy. They do all these reports. I mean, if you look at their stuff, I mean, they really, it is a pretty sophisticated bureaucracy that doesn't have, there's not many others that compare. And it literally started, the whole Southern Baptist Convention literally started in order to be able to appoint slaveholders as missionaries, because the previous Baptist convention that they were a part of would not do that. So it was missions that formed the Southern Baptist Convention. Think about that.
It's pretty, I mean, it's hard to put your finger on it, like mentally, because it's like, is that just a result of wanting to stay in the power position?
Again, I just think I think slavery is so deeper in history, when human society was, all human society was structured according to rigid hierarchies, and the concept of individual rights did not exist. Slavery was maybe bad and uncomfortable in some respects, but it was kind of normal. But after the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment and the American Revolution, slavery became incredibly conspicuous. Even the founding fathers talked about that. They were pretty honest about, yeah, we've got this nation we're founding on these amazing principles, and we've got the slavery thing, and it's kind of icky, but I don't know what to do with it, and I need it for my plantation. So I guess we're just going to but it's real icky. Well, over time, what happened is, it became racism entrenched more and more and more as a justification. And the message of the Great Awakenings was one of individual liberation, and was quite revolutionary, as much as the American Revolution was. And it didn't, in the North, that wasn't as dangerous, but in the South, that could completely tear apart your entire economy and society and everything that is put together according to slavery. And so pro-slavery theology started.
Do you have hope, or do you have a positive viewpoint at all about where some of the white evangelical missions is today?
I do think that there's more discussion, at least lip service in these circles about, because the global church now exceeds the American church in size. And actually, half of all missionaries globally are not American, but half still are American. But the issue that I've been told by non-American missiologists is the money and the resources are still an American, and there's still the power is still very American, and the American Christians just don't want to kind of let go. And you see this really now. One of the frustrations I've had in people's reaction to the book among true blue sort of evangelicals is they're looking for ways to make it okay for us to keep doing this, like, oh, okay, tell me how I can, okay, you've identified some problems. How can we fix that so we can keep doing this and it'll be okay? And I'm like, maybe you're not supposed to keep doing this. Maybe
and this being the going
missions,
abroad and being mission
right.
focused.
Maybe the world has kind of got this now. Maybe the global church has. Maybe you should actually trust people, other Christians, and trust God. I mean, imagine. And I just think, to me, I'm very cognizant of. I look at the American church. Certainly the evangelical church. I go to a mainline church who I think we're doing the right thing in this moment, and we're trying to help our neighbors and advocate for marginalized people. And I think that's rooted in Scripture. But if I look at we're a small, evangelicalism has a way more is probably more representative of American Christianity. So I look at and I just think, you are so messed up. Like, what business do we have, going around the world when the church here is so broken?
So you call yourself an ex-evangelical, and was there a moment where you switched, or was it a slide for you?
It was a long process. It started when I went to graduate school and got divorced. That sort of began the process of unraveling things for me.
When I was telling a few people about interviewing you, one comment that I had was that you have gone on this journey because you had a bad experience in the
No, I
mission
didn't
field,
actually.
which I know. So I thought that it was very clear to me that you didn't have a bad experience. But what other types of, I guess, commentary have you gotten about about writing this book that have kind of been dismissive of what the whole book is about?
Well, that's the main one, is that I'm just bitter and angry. And it's like, I actually had a good childhood. I mean, some elements of it were like I went to boarding school very young, and that's, been something that has affected me negatively and certainly my relationship with my parents. Um, so there's that. But I ended up strongly attaching to the school and the people there. And, I loved it. I mean, I love it as if it were my family. I still have that strong attachment to it. But see, that's not healthy and normal to have your strong attachment to a school
Right.
instead of your actual family. That's not really healthy. But I had a good experience there. There were some traumatic things. MKs typically experience more, danger than other, regular Americans. And certainly I had some incidences that were mildly traumatizing, I would say. Again, the homesickness, being a child, a little kid at a boarding school is a trauma that has stayed with me. But the worst part for me was just having to leave and the grief of that, which I really didn't dig out of for years, probably 7 years. I don't know. I still have moments of grief. Like like you're mourning a loved one, deep nostalgia, like just a yearning. I try to go back. I go back a lot, actually. And I feel almost frantic when if I'm leaving and I don't know for sure when I'm coming back.
Hmm.
Um,
It,
I
it
feel
triggers
almost
something in
this,
you.
yeah, I feel almost, I've gone, at one point I went 9 years without going. And that was just, I mean, it was like, it was, anyway, I don't want to ever go 9 years without going. So I feel this intense need to maintain some connection there, even though I think the hard thing for me is I feel very alienated from the missionary culture there now, whereas before I felt a part of it. So now when I go back, I don't really fit in that culture. And so, but one thing that has helped is I've developed relationships with some Kenyans, in particular, one Kenyan family, and he was our safari driver many years ago, and we just sort of formed a bond and we kept in touch. And then we, went on safari with him over and over again. And then he decided he wanted to form his own company. And so we kind of became investors in his company. And now I take groups and he's, and over the years, he's watched our kids grow up and we've gotten to know his family as well. So relationships like that are with actual Kenyans, which
Hmm.
are meaningful to me.
And
So that's,
relationship being the key word, I think. And when you go back, I struggle with this when I go back to Ethiopia, is the idea of white savior complex. How have you navigated that for you in your trips back as an adult?
well, a lot of my trips back were actually with the government. I went for work and then I would visit people. So that's a whole different mindset. And obviously there's some overlaps there. But in terms of how people treat you, that is for real. And I never liked it. Even as a child, I didn't like the deference. And
Yeah,
I
it's
still
so
don't.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I don't like it. Again, even my friend Moses thanking me, which he doesn't do it as much anymore, but he'll still do, I'm just like, stop with this. You know what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
I try to push back. But yeah, no, it's hard to avoid. One of the things I tell people is like, just when you go to countries, go as a tourist. Like you don't have to do any good deeds. You could just go as a tourist. It's like blows people's mind. I'm like, why wouldn't you go as a tourist? That's a huge part of their economy. You're stimulating all kinds of economic growth, not just helping certain, communities or locations. You're feeding into an entire industry with wide reach. But you're also like, that's a compliment. If someone comes to your house because they want to, because they enjoy being in your house, that's different than if they're coming because they feel sorry for you and they want to help. They're going to paint your roof and that's why they're coming. I'm coming to your, you know what I'm saying? Like it's more of it's a really different outlook to be like, I'm here because you have a lot of amazing things that I want to partake in. Not I'm here to help you, That's a very different outlook. So I tell people, just be a tourist and then just act like a normal person. Like if you wouldn't do something in Europe, like don't do it in Africa, So,
yeah, I'm envisioning
like that.
the selfie with a kid from Africa that you're like, see, I'm doing a good thing.
You're helping them,
Like I'm doing my deed. Like, look at me.
Yeah, like when I volunteer around here, like I do some volunteer work, we should all do that. It doesn't make me a hero. It's just like a thing that everybody should do is you volunteer in your community. I'm not going, first of all, I don't think it's legal. Like I volunteered at a women's shelter. I do not take pictures of myself with the women. I don't even think that's allowed, but I would never even dream of doing that. Do you know?
Also, like, it is a little, in my opinion, it's a little dehumanizing of like, you're in a bad spot in your life. I walk in to the door and I now feel maybe better about myself because I've had this experience. And so I want you to smile and be in a photo with me on one of your possibly worst season of life. Like,
right.
It's
now I understand some organizations and even missionaries,
sure.
They have to raise funds and you have to sort of do promotional stuff. There's a fine line, but there's a difference between like, this is something I have to do versus like, this is, I do think it's corrosive. It's not even so much the damage done to the people. It's just corrosive of one's own spirit. Do you know? It's not healthy to be worshipped ever. I always wonder about like Taylor Swift, bringing up Taylor again. But I always wonder about, I'm a
I'll
Swiftie.
always talk about Taylor Swift. Me too.
I'm a
Huge
Swiftie. I'm a geriatric Swiftie. But like I always wonder about like, these celebrities and just like that and you see it wreck a lot of them. She's one
right.
that I feel like you can see her sort of actively fighting it,
Right.
You can see her
very close
sort of
familial ties and longtime
constantly
friends.
and just checking herself. You can see just how she sort of talks about the fans and just situates them in her mind and in her heart, and just how she regards. You can tell that she's always checking herself all the time. And then you can see clearly many celebrities that put zero effort into that. And you see what the difference in their character pretty clearly. So I don't know, like a lot of people like, oh, the damage to, and I say about the book, I'm not really making an assessment about the harm this has done around the world. I think it's probably, it's a mixed bag. There's been some good things. There's been some bad things. Missionaries helped end female circumcision in Kenya. Was that colonial? Yes. Was it a good thing? I think so. I don't think female circumcision is a great thing. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of a mixed bag, and I don't know how you assess that. But what I am here to say, and what I think the book's overall message is to say, that missions has been very unhealthy for the American church. And its view of itself and the way it has been able to escape its failures here at home and really mature as a community of faith.
Well, it was an excellent book. I have it dog-eared all throughout.
Thank
and
you.
I thought you did an incredible job. Not that you need my praise, but I'm
well,
passing
see,
this
now
on
it's
to
going to go
someone
to my
else,
head, and I'm going to have to talk myself down because Leah
You're great. You're amazing. You're the best
I
author
tell you
ever.
I tell you what, that publishing a book is it's its own humility. And you've done all this work and you've gotten very little money and you've gotten very little, you're really not a big deal. And so it's quite humbling. And you're going around begging. I've done book events with like 3 people there, you know. And
well,
it's like,
I think you're a big deal.
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it won't go to my head because tomorrow there'll be something else that happens that assures me that I am definitely not a big deal. So it's all good. It's all healthy.
This episode was produced by the Anthology Group.